And we were dedicating the class for the Leilu Nishmat, the Bibas family. And
Bezrat Hashem, yes.
Refuah Shelema, excuse me just one second. לרפואה שלמה, אליהו הנביא בן ציטה אסתר, יוסף ישי בן דניאל מרים, רחל בת אמיליה, רב שלום דובר בן רחל בילה, אליסבת נינה, שולמית סוליקה בת רבקה, רפאל יאיש בן חנה, לורנס אביבה בת שרה, קרולין יהודית בת ג'ואל אליאן סימה, נועה בן סלון, אלני אורנה בת חן, חנה רפאל חיים מאיר בן סימה חשה, רב פסר יוסף בן הינדה, רב דניאל בן רחמה, Alexandra Shirley, Bat Nicole Malka. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Bezrat Hashem, with pleasure. Okay, Bezrat Hashem. So, starting from now, Bezrat Hashem, we are going to switch over a little bit to Pesach. Yeah, so Bezrat Hashem, after Pesach, we're gonna restart the Shabbat again. We'll put it on pause for now. And as I'm sure many of you are already getting into preparations and thinking about what's going to be, how's everything going to go on. So we're gonna start talking about that now, Bezrat Hashem. So the first thing that obviously, like we pay attention to before technically even the cleaning, which is obviously very important, but I guess we're going to get into that a little bit later. We're going to talk about first the foods and the preparations for Pesach that don't necessarily come with the cleaning and the koshering. So this year Pesach, it's important to know for those of you that didn't look at the calendar yet, but I'm sure many of you or most of you have at least for sure. Pesach is going to be on Motzai Shabbat. Okay, which means that normally in a normal year we have Erev Pesach, where the day before Pesach we're able to eat chametz till a certain amount of time, and then we burn the chametz on that day, and then that very night is going to be the Leil HaSeder. However, this year, because the Leil HaSeder is Motzei Shabbat, which means that we have Shabbat, and directly right after Shabbat goes right into Yom Tov. So we cannot obviously burn the chametz on Shabbat, which would be the normal time that we would burn it. So what we do is we do the b'dikat chametz Thursday night. We burn the chametz on Friday morning, and then we only have the Leil HaSeder, we only have it Motzei Shabbat. The main issue that comes up when we have Pesach like this, in years where Pesach falls out like this, is when we do the meal of Shabbat. So we know that there's a mitzvah and there's a kind of a chiyuv, an obligation, for a person to have a meal on Shabbat at night, and also during the day, minimum one meal during the day, preferably two, which we obviously know is the second one is going to be Suda Shlishit. The first one Friday night, second in the morning, and then Suda Shlishit in the afternoon. Now, the problem that comes up is because we have on Shabbat, which is Erev Pesach, we have a time limit of when we can eat the chametz. So every year we have the time limit. We tell you that you can eat chametz until this time. Shabbat, you have the same problem or the same thing. But the difference is that with Shabbat, we know that the tefillah usually takes longer. So throughout the regular year, we have no problem of a person waking up, even he wakes up even a little bit late, they do whatever it is, they have time to eat the chametz and then go out and burn the chametz. However, Shabbat, since we know that the tefillah is usually longer, we have to be careful with the time of chametz. So this year in Miami, the latest time that we can eat chametz, according to the Sfaradim, on Shabbat morning is at 10:50. So that means that most families, or what families will need to do, and obviously this is dependent on the community where you're in, we're going to have early tefillah Shabbat morning. This way the people can come home early, the men can come home early, and we have to finish eating our chametz completely by 10:50. So normally we only start finishing shul close to 11, but now you have to start finishing your meal at 10:50. So that's one thing that we have to be careful of. And then we have the bitul chametz, which we do later on. But it's important to know that when we start preparing for Pesach, we have to understand that we're going to have to eat that last meal, Erev Pesach, very early, which means that most shuls are probably going to have like a netz minyan or a really early minyan to allow for this to happen. Now, when it gets to foods on Pesach, we know that obviously chametz in itself is not allowed, right? But even things that are mixed in with chametz are not allowed. Now, there's a small difference on how that works. So, if something was mixed during Pesach with chametz, for example, there's a little kid that comes and they have even a wafer, right? They somehow managed to find a not kosher for Pesach wafer, if there are kosher for Pesach wafers, that is, and they're walking around the house. They take a bite. The wafer makes a bunch of flakes and crumbs, and one of these flakes fall into a pot, okay, or even to a plate, a dish, whatever it is. At that moment, chametz bepesach osel b'mashihu, meaning even the smallest of crumbs falls into a dish. That whole dish now becomes asur on Pesach. You would have to throw the whole thing out. However, if something like this happened before Pesach, meaning if during your preparations for Pesach somehow some chametz managed to get mixed in, there's a difference between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. For Sfaradim, if it got annulled before Pesach in 60 times, meaning you had 60 times the amount of kosher for Pesach versus one of not kosher for Pesach, and just as a side matter, because Bezat Hashem, we're going to be learning about this when we go further into kasherut, 1 out of 60 is actually very, very, very small. Some people, when we just imagine it 160, we say, okay, it's for sure 160, and we don't really pay attention. But it's important to know that 1 in 60 is extremely small. Just for you to get an idea of how small it is, make yourself like a square and make 60 boxes in that square. Color one of those in, and you're going to see how one box versus 60 versus the other 59, how small that actually is. So when we're saying 1 in 60, it's extremely, extremely small. So if for this Sfaradim it was annulled before Pesach in 60, then on Pesach itself, you would be allowed to continue benefiting from it. However, for the Ashkenazim, if it was annulled in 60 before Pesach, even so, on Pesach, it would be asur. So this comes up, and this is a halacha that's going to repeat itself numerous times, where for Sfaradim, we tell you that many times it's better to buy something before Pesach in the event that there might have been a tiny bit of chametz mixed inside, so that it would be annulled before Pesach. But for the Ashkenazim, it wouldn't really make a difference if you buy it before or after, because even if it's 1 in 60 before Pesach, during Pesach, we still say that it gets the isur. Okay, so this is also, like, I think, one of the debates that they bring up with Coca-Cola. So we know that here in America we have kosher for Pesach Coke, right? Usually with the yellow cap to show the difference. For the Sfaradim, if it was bought before Pesach, there is no need to have a kosher for Pesach Coke. Because even if there was a little bit of chametz, if it was annulled before Pesach, then there's no problem. For the Ashkenazim, no, they need that kosher for Pesach Coke, and that's just one of the examples of things that come up that there would be a difference between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. There is no problem to eat milk from cows that were fed chametz on Pesach, meaning that if you have a cow of a non-Jew, that the non-Jew is feeding the cow chametz, and now you take milk from the cow, there is no problem. Now the milk is the cow was being fed chametz on Pesach, so the milk becomes chametz. No, there's no problem there's no problem with that. Obviously, if it's a Jew that's feeding the cow chametz, it's a big problem. You're not allowed to give your animals to eat chametz. So that means if a person has pets at home, they would have to be careful, and they would have to look at the ingredients of the pet food to make sure that there's no wheat, or I've even seen yeast in for example, in dog food. I know that, like, people have shown me in the past that there is yeast there. If there's any chametz mixed in the ingredients of animal food, you cannot give it to your animal on Pesach. You cannot own such a thing on Pesach. So what you would need to do is already a month before start preparing, and make sure that the the food, they're going to be used to a different diet. So you just make sure that they get used to other food that's not going to be kosher for Pesach. Slowly, this way, when it comes to Pesach, you can completely change their diet without them suffering too drastic of a diet change in one shot. Okay. Additionally, you're also able to eat cheese or fish or similar things that were salted with, in a way you can say, salt that wasn't kosher for Pesach. Okay. But once again, if something like this comes up, it's better to buy it before Pesach to avoid any problem of chaz v'shalom. If there's chametz mixed involved, it was annulled before Pesach. The same thing would apply to um, making jam in containers that you don't necessarily watch over them for Pesach. We're gonna learn Bezat Hashem as we go along in Hilchot kasherut that there's a very big machloket, or there's a very big discussion between the Sfaradim and the Ashkenazim in regards to glass containers. For the Sfaradim, glass containers, there's no problem whatsoever with them, meaning you can use them for meat, you can use them for milk, you can use them for chametz, as long as it's clean. Even if they were cooked inside, no matter what, you can always switch between the two, between the three, technically, milk, meat, and chametz. There is no problem whatsoever. Glass doesn't need to be kosher. It needs to be taken to the mikveh before using like any other utensil, right? Preferably, yes. So it needs to be taken to the mikveh, but it doesn't need to be koshered in between. For the Ashkenazim, on the other hand,
Sorry,
glass cannot be koshered.
I have just a question. If the
Bezat
glass
Hashem.
is coloring, it's color, like it's not transparent, it's a glass but pink.
Okay, it doesn't change. If it's glass, it's glass.
It is it.
For the Sfaradim, there's no problem with
Yeah,
glass. For the Ashkenazim, there is.
for all my wine glass, there is some with like colors, like the glass is color. Comment on dit les colorés?
Yeah, it's
All
color.
right. It's colored glass.
The glass, no?
Okay, and I have another question. When I last Passover, when I put back my dishes of Passover in the closet of Passover, I realized then that I forgot some bowl, glass, very coloring, in a chametz closet with all my plates. And until now, I never touch it. It's in the floor of the closet. Can I use this year for a Passover?
So Ashkenaz or Sepharad?
Sfarad.
Sfarad. So Sfarad, there's no problem whatsoever. Meaning, once again, if it's glass, as long as it's clean, as long as it's like, we now, Baruch Hashem, nowadays we have soap, we have dish soap. You clean it. As long as you clean it, there's no problem whatsoever. Even if you used it throughout the year with chametz, as long as it's properly cleaned, you can use it again. You can use it throughout Pesach. There's no problem. For the Ashkenazim, if you use it, uh, if you use it for chametz, you cannot use it on Pesach. You cannot use it on Pesach afterwards. Now, it's important to know that this halacha comes up also many times when a person is traveling. So you travel, you go to Airbnb, you go to hotel, you go to these different places, and you have glass utensils over there for Sfaradim. there's no problem whatsoever. Even if it was used with not kosher, you can still technically use it, because the glass never absorbs for the Sfadim. For the Ashkenazim, once again, yes, there is a problem with it. But
That
for
question,
yeah.
because at the time I was working for Chabad, I remember that they the koshering for glass for them, but I don't know if it's for Ashkenazim or just for Chabad, was like to clean it well, to leave it 24 hours, and then to leave it in cold water, plunge for 24 hours, and change the water every 24 hours for 3 days.
So there is things, there are things like that. If I'm not mistaken, I have to like double check. I didn't fully prepare for the kashrut part of the class. So
Frankfurt is very strict with the Chabad kashrut, but for Pesach he was teaching that. For Pesach they were teaching, but not for Pyrex, for glass, like regular glass.
it's still very good. So it's also important to know. It's also important to know, because you mentioned before that you were talking about wine glasses. Wine glasses, even for Ashkenazim, wouldn't be a problem to use the same wine glasses that were used throughout the year, to use them for Pesach, for the simple reason that with a wine glass, you're never using it with something hot. A wine glass is always used with cold. And you're not leaving any wine in there, hopefully at least, you're not leaving any wine in there for more than 24 hours. So that means that it's never getting to a point where even for the Ashkenazim, there's a absorption of taste. So the wine glasses can stay the same, right? It's other glasses that like teacups or something, or coffee cups sometimes, that you might have to be careful. But the wine glasses, since they're always used with cold, you don't have to worry about that. Okay. Sorry, before I forget, I remember last class that we asked, there was a question that was asked concerning, I know it's a little bit off topic, but I didn't want to forget about this now, concerning if there was a meat that wasn't fully cooked or fish that wasn't fully cooked, can you reheat it on Shabbat? So the answer is, again, even if it's rare, or if it's fish that's not fully cooked, and this is the way you like to eat it, you don't like to eat it fully cooked, you cannot heat it on Shabbat. Because once again, like we were saying back then, that every percentage more that you're cooking it, every percentage more that you're getting it to cook, is isur on Shabbat. Okay, so that's, sorry for the interruption. That's the halacha for that. Now, so we were talking about glass, how for Sfaradim there's no problem with glass, as opposed to Ashkenazim, that there would be problem with glass. Now, if it's used only for cold, and you know for a fact that it's used only for cold, and that it's used for less than 24 hours at a time, because Bezrat Hashem, as we're going to learn, there is zaracha that if you leave liquid in a container for more than 24 hours at a time, so it now absorbs whatever's there. Okay, it's called kavush kimbushan. Kavush kimbushan, meaning pickling is like cooking. So you have to be careful with that if you know that it was there for more than 24 hours. For the Ashkenazim, and once again for the Sfaradim, there's no problem with that. So let's say you were making a product like jam, okay, in utensils that you don't necessarily keep for chametz, okay, you would still be allowed to use those utensils to make jam kosher for Pesach, okay. However, once again, Ashkenazim are strict with this. Okay, so even for the Sfaradim, if we generally, even if it's not glass, if it's a utensil you just put like to make jam, to make sometimes pickled lemons. Pickled lemons might be a bit of a different, but generally, again, there's no problem with that. It's because it's oil and salt, and usually oil and salt are kosher for Pesach, depending on which ones, of course. Be'ezrat Hashem, not Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll try to. My father every year he tries to put out a pamphlet, a guide for Pesach, which products don't need kosher for Pesach, which products do. So Bezat Hashem, I'll try to make that available for you. And you can see over there, usually, if I'm not mistaken, vegetable oil doesn't need to be kosher for Pesach, and canola oil recently has been a little bit of a problem, So you'd have to be careful with those things.
That's only for Arabic, the vegetable oil.
So very good for that. When it gets to these type of things,
So Chabad they
another
don't
thing.
use anything that is
Cotton,
industrial, right? Right.
very good. So when it gets to all these food products, it's important to know that there is many, many, many different customs. Meaning, even Ashkenazim, like Sfaradim less, but even amongst the Ashkenazim, especially amongst the Hasidim, you have so many different customs, and each one more or less goes with them, like it goes with their own. So I know, like some Hasidim, they literally have restriction for everything besides for salt and pepper, meaning no spices whatsoever besides for salt and pepper. Some of them say even garlic is a problem. Some people don't like tomatoes, like they peel the tomatoes before they use. There is so many different customs when it comes to Pesach. So it's not even a question of Ashkenazim and Sfaradim anymore. It's a question of minhag. Each family does like what they're accustomed to. And if you have questions or you're not sure what your minhag is, so either you ask your parents, or you go to your rabbi that is your family rabbi, so they would be able to tell it to you. Again, I'm giving um the general not even requirements, but the things that are generally kosher. Again, afterwards, if your custom is not like that, then that's your custom, because again, it's impossible to be able to go and get to every single minhag. But I'll generally try to, Bezat Hashem, talk between the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim in general. Okay, so if by mistake a person cooks something in a not kosher for Pesach pot, so by mistake they used one of the pots that weren't kosher for Pesach to cook food for Pesach, the food would be allowed. There's no problem to benefit from the food. Obviously, the pot is not okay. You would not be able to reuse the pot. But if by mistake, and again, once again, it's only by mistake, not if a person purposely says, I'm going to use this pot. If by mistake it was cooked in it, then there's no problem to use it. When it gets to dried fruits, like prunes, apricots, stuff like this, the Ashkenazim are generally strict with this, okay? And Sfaradim are lenient. But even the Sfaradim that are lenient, you have to be careful because sometimes there is flour mixed in, meaning here it's less, I guess, less common outside of Israel. But when you go to Israel, they have what's called garinim. Garinim literally in Hebrew means seeds. You know, you have the sunflower seeds, you have the pumpkin seeds. So I know they have it here, but over here it's less of the culture. So when they have that in Israel, so a lot of the times it's salted. Now, what happens is many times the vendors, they mix flour purposely with the salt to give it an extra taste, to give it to make it a little bit heavier for whatever reason it is. So even though, like we're going to learn, in general, salt itself doesn't need to be kosher for Pesach, right? You just have to be careful with, that there shouldn't be any flour around it to be mixed in. So you have to be careful when you're buying these type of things that they shouldn't have flour mixed in together with the salt, so that you don't, chas v'shalom, come to be eating the chametz on Pesach. Now, like we said, in general, salt, tea, sugar, coffee, right? Those don't need to be kosher for Pesach. Coffee, you just have to be careful that it's black coffee and not flavored coffee. So any flavored coffee would need to be have a kosher for Pesach. But if it's just plain black coffee, there's no issue with that usually. Now I know this doesn't apply for a lot of people because a lot of people don't eat rice on Pesach. For sure not the Ashkenazim, but even amongst the Sfaradim, generally speaking, the Moroccans, for example, they don't have rice on Pesach. Other Sfaradim do have rice on Pesach. So if a person has the custom to have rice on Pesach, if it's a shiny rice, you have to be careful. If the rice is a little bit bright, you have to be careful because many times they add wheat starch to it. They add wheat starch, and this is what gives it the shine. So you would have to be careful if you're not sure was it used with wheat starch and you don't really have you're not really able to verify it. So what you should do is before using it, you have to wash it extremely well and then rub it. Now, also for anyone that wants to use rice on Pesach, based on the custom, you would have to check the rice before Pesach, meaning you would have to go through the rice to make sure that there's nothing else mixed in the rice that could be chametz. After you do that, then you would be allowed to use it for Pesach. And like what we said, you would have to wash it extremely well to get off anything that would be on it. Plus, rub it to make sure that even if there was a little bit of starch on it before, and that it might have been wheat starch because it's not necessarily only wheat starch that they use. This way, when you wash it and rub it completely, it comes off. Then you can use it. Okay, there is another food that there's a big machloket between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, and this is what's called matzah ashira. Matzah ashira means rich matzah, literally. But what defines matzah ashira is that it wasn't made with water. Normally, we know in order to make bread or to make whatever it is, we generally take the flour and we mix it with water, and then we turn it into whatever it is. Matzah ashira, on the other hand, is made with flour and no water whatsoever, only either fruit juice, wine, honey. That's how you mix it. So when you do something like that, it's called matzah shira. Now, the Ashkenazim are strict with matzah shira to the point where they say you cannot eat matzah shira on Pesach. Before Pesach, you can eat it. You cannot eat matzah shira on Pesach unless it's for kids or for sick people that are not able to have regular matzah. So then they can have they're allowed to have matzah shira. Sfaradim, on the other hand, are lenient with this, and they allow to eat matzah ashira. I'm sure most of you are aware that you can also make cookies, cakes. I know my wife likes to make pancakes, right? You can make all of these things if you have the proper recipe, of course, from matzah meat with matzah flour, matzah meal, which basically means that they take matzah, it was ready-made matzah, they completely grind it, so now it becomes like kind of not really flour, but it becomes like really finely ground matzah, and they use that to afterwards to make the cookies, to make like I said, like pancakes, cakes even, and that the bracha on something like that would actually be mizonot. So even if that would be one of the ways to have mizonot on Pesach, which is normally very hard to find, but if you have cookies or cakes that were made from matzah meal, you would make a mizonot on that, and we don't have to worry about if a person is using them. We don't have to worry about mar'it ha'ain, that people might suspect that you're cooking with real chametz, because again, most people know on Pesach that a person is not going to be breaking Pesach to make regular cookies or whatever it is, especially because they're so careful with everything else, and they understand that you're using matzah meal, which would be allowed. Okay, we have we know what defines chametz on Pesach. What defines something as chametz on Pesach is if it is fit for a dog to eat. Okay? So if we have something that a dog wouldn't eat, even if it's mixed with chametz, it's It's not chametz. Okay. An example of this would be, let's say we know that chametz, you're not allowed to benefit at all on Pesach. You can't use any sort of benefit, even if it's not to eat it, you can't benefit. So if you have chametz and you want to give it to a goy for that he should benefit from it, you can't do that. The only thing that you can do with chametz on Pesach is to burn it. And we'll see that in a little bit. But so if a person has something that has mixed in chametz, but it's not fit for a dog's consumption, and this happens before Pesach. So, for example, you can have shoe polish that can sometimes have a chametz mixed inside. Glue, okay, some glues are made with like with a wheat, something that's derived from wheat, right? Cigarettes, for example, that use this type of glue that is with wheat. All those things, if they were done before Pesach, you're allowed to benefit from them even during Pesach. Why? Because once again, they're not fit for the consumption of a dog. So that means that they're not chametz, but it has to be done before Pesach, because anything that is on Pesach, you're not allowed to benefit from it even a little bit. So if you made it afterwards, not fit for a dog, it was already a soul before you made it.
I have a question, please. I have a lot, like I have more than 10 kilos of a flour, regular flour from Costco, and Baruch Hashem, because of the midrasha, I learned that the yashan
Yeah,
the halacha. So I start to buy only the kosher flour, like in the kosher shop. But for sure I cannot keep these 10 kilos of flour in my house during Passover.
so very good.
After Passover, I can use it technically.
So very good. So we have nowadays, and I'm sure it's like pretty widespread, where we have this concept of selling the chametz. Okay.
It's gamur. It's not like it's not.
So flour isn't chametz gamur.
I can give housekeeper, like it's not expensive.
I
It's not.
know, but it's not again. So let me explain a little bit, and then we're going to go into that. So the way it works is like this: when a person sells chametz on Pesach, we know that on Pesach you're not allowed to own any chametz, and you're not allowed to have any chametz in your property that belongs to you during Pesach. So the solution that the rabbis came up with, why? Because nowadays we're able to stockpile what they weren't able to generally use back then. They didn't really have, like, they ate what they had and then they made more. They didn't really have like possible chametz laying around. So, especially for those people that they have like whiskey collections, where a whiskey collection can literally be $50,000, even $100,000. You have a lot, and then if you tell a person they can't, they have to get rid of it before Pesach, that's a lot of money. So, what the Chachamim came up with, they came up with a concept of, you are selling this chametz, you are selling all the chametz that you own to a non-Jew before Pesach. Okay, so you sell it to the non-Jew before Pesach, and then the chametz doesn't belong to you throughout the Pesach. So let's say we're going to go with that whiskey example, right? So you're selling your whiskey collection to a non-Jew before Pesach, and that means that during Pesach, the chametz belongs to him. It's important to know that when we do this sale of chametz, the chametz belongs fully, 100%, to the non-Jew, which means that if the non-Jew wants, he is able to come into your house and demand and say, "Where's my whiskey? I want my whiskey. I want to drink my whiskey," and you have to give it to him. You cannot say no. Again, at the end of Pesach, when the rabbi is going to buy back the chametz from the non-Jew, right? It's not a rental. It's a full sale, which is being done on both ways. Meaning, before Pesach, the rabbi sells the chametz. The chametz belongs 100% to the non-Jew, and it belongs to him till forever. It belongs to him fully. at the end of Pesach, when the rabbi comes and buys back the chametz, he is buying back the chametz fully as well. There's complications, or not complications, but it's a process that again, it's not so simple, but that's more or less how the concept works. Many rabbis, now it's not strict halacha, but many rabbis say that we shouldn't be playing such a trick or such a game, or it's not, truthfully, it's not a trick or a game, it's a fully valid sale, like we said. But at the end of the day, it's not the straight halacha, because the halacha tells you get rid of the chametz. So many rabbis say that if a person decides to do such a sale, they should only do it for chametz that is not pure chametz. So pure chametz would be like what we said. It would be technically whiskey, but whiskey they're a little bit more lenient with, because again, it's really expensive. But for example, pretzels, cookies. Um, uh, I've heard in the past many people, what they like to do is they like to make mufleta before Pesach, freeze the mufleta throughout Pesach, sell it, and then right after Pesach they have the mufleta ready, like literally 10 minutes after Pesach, and they're already starting the mimuna. Many rabbis are against this concept, because when you do something like that, you're basically showing how the whole thing is like in a way, it's like a joke, because you're saying, okay, here, I'm making the mufleta so I can benefit from it afterwards, which basically means that you're showing 100% that this sale is only to be bought back afterwards, as opposed to if a person sells their whiskey collection. So even if they don't end up having their whiskey, at least they're getting the full money back. They're getting their money, or whatever it's worth. And over here, you don't want the worth of the mufletot, you want the mufletot. So it's a bit complicated when you do something like that. Flour, on the other hand, flour is not something that is chametz vadai, meaning obviously, you know, flour, well, chametz, flour isn't even chametz. What happens with the flour can make it chametz, which means that if the flour comes in contact with water, then it's very possible for it to become chametz, which is why we don't want to use flour at all on Pesach. And it should be put away, meaning you shouldn't be using flour. And there are some people that make matzot, but even the Shulchan Aruch, he says that you shouldn't be really making matzot on Pesach, for the chashash, for the fear that you might come to delay even a minute, and then you made chametz instead of matzah. But flour in itself is not really chametz, which means that if you sell flour as part of your sale, there is no issue with that. So that's the problem with, or that's not the problem. That's the solution that they came up with for selling the chametz. And it's important to know that if a person does do the sale of chametz, to not use their chametz before the rabbi buys it back. So normally, whenever the rabbi buys it back, it takes like after Pesach, it takes another like 15-20 minutes for the rabbi to finalize the sale of or finalize the buyback of the chametz on Motzai Pesach. So you shouldn't use it. Right away. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, we said not to sell chametz vadai. Now, if a person finds chametz in public on Pesach, or even if a person finds chametz in their own home on Pesach. Now, in their own home, it's a little bit different. We'll explain. But if a person finds chametz in public on Pesach, they shouldn't do anything. They shouldn't touch it. They shouldn't move it. They shouldn't play around with it. Just leave it the way it is. Move on. It has nothing to do with you. You don't have to worry about it. So don't get involved with it. If a person finds chametz on Pesach in their own home, that's when a person has to be careful. So if it's during the Chag, which means if it's during the days of Yom Tov, chametz is going to be muktzeh, which means you will not be allowed to move it or do anything to it. What you should do is you should take a bowl, cover it, so that it shouldn't be moved, so it shouldn't be get anywhere, chaz v'shalom. And then after Pesach, meaning after the Chag, during Chol HaMoed, you burn it. You burn it on the side. You make a small, you make a small fire, and you can burn it. You can burn it then. If it was found during Chol HaMoed, then you don't have to turn it over. You don't have to turn a utensil over it. You just burn it right away. You make yourself a small fire, and you burn it. If sorry, so this, yeah, so when it gets to medicine on Pesach, okay, so medicine on Pesach, it's sometimes there is chametz ingredients inside medicine. So if it's something that has a taste, meaning, like, for example, like throat drops, like, I don't know, throat candies, like Ricola. They have quite a few in Israel, like medicated launches, I think they're called, things like this, that technically speaking they're a medicine. If they have a flavor and they're chametz, don't use them on Pesach. If they don't have a flavor, okay, and the sickness is it's not for just like a headache. It's for something. It's like for an underlying health problem, like, for example, lo anenu v'lo alechem, like diabetes, or things like that, which, technically speaking, if a person doesn't take them, obviously in the given circumstance of each person individually, if they don't take them, they can survive, but it's better for them to have it, to keep up their health. So in this case, if they don't have a taste, even if they're made with chametz, you can still use them. Okay. However, once again, they should be bought before Pesach. And if a person is able to, they should, like, think to themselves that when they're buying it, they're not intending to acquire any of the chametz that's in there, and then they can have it. They can have it during Pesach, not a problem. If it's something that can lead to chas v'shalom, something that is life threatening, then there's nothing more to talk about, and that's right away. That's right away mutar. As a general rule, it is always good to try to see if there is an alternative to the medicine that if there's chametz in it. I know there are lists that go around, which medicines are okay for Pesach, which medicines aren't okay. Speak to your doctor or your pharmacist to see, if a medicine has chametz ingredients, if they can substitute it with other ones that don't. I know many of the ingredients that have wheat, sometimes they can substitute it for corn, and it does more or less it's basically the same medicine. It just different way of making it, and they normally are okay. So those are things that a person should look out for on Pesach if they're going to be taking medicine, that some medicines aren't kosher for Pesach. Depending on the situation, sometimes they can have the medicine, no problem. Other times, they have to be careful with it. So I guess if it gets the medicine, each one should ask their rabbi what, if there's a problem with the given medicine or not. Obviously, finding out first before we go and bother the rabbi and think that the rabbi is a pharmacist, if he knows exactly the chametz ingredients that are used or not. Find out if there is chametz, and if there is, then you ask the rabbi, can we use it or not on Pesach? Animals that were fed chametz during Pesach. So we spoke about this briefly before. There is technically no problem eating, or even eating the animal that was fed chametz on Pesach. So if there's an animal that is fed chametz on Pesach, and then you want to do shechita on it afterwards, you want to eat it, there's no problem with that technically. You just have to be careful with the insides afterwards. So, for example, with chickens, they have, I think in English it's called the gizzard, where they keep food in there, and very often, like, the food even remains. No, sorry, the gizzard is the maybe it's the gizzard. and they keep food over there whole. So sometimes you can find, like, if it's like kernels of wheat or stuff that is still chametz, and it's still going to be whole in those animals. So you'd have to be a little bit careful with that. But the animal, the meat of the animal itself, even if the animal ate chametz, is not a problem. So the same thing applies for milk. If you want to have milk from a cow that was fed chametz on Pesach, like we said, by a non-Jew, there's no problem with any of that. Any questions, Bezat Hashem?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, Bezat Hashem. All right, so we'll stop here, and Bezat Hashem, maybe next class we'll start on the koshering process of Pesach, Bezat Hashem.
So much, Rabbi.
No
Thank you so
problem.
much. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.